Alright everyone, it is 9/11, George W. Bush's favorite holiday. I'm sure that at some point they're going to have to keep him from going out in public for fear that he's going to break down in hysterical laughter and start talking about all the people that died and how wonderful it was. Definitely helped with his career. He wouldn't have been re-elected on his own merits if people weren't still worried about the War on Terror bullshit. By the way, the War of Terror, an old joke, but it's a pertinent one, sort of like a gallows humor, I suppose. I wanted you to remember this 9/11, that government is the problem. That really is the name of the game. It's the flavor of all time. The government caused 9/11 through its malfeasant policies in the Middle East, and I'm going to try to take you through a rough, basic timeline of what happened leading up to that period and literally leading to what's happening currently. The United States doesn't need any longer to be directly involved with these things because the energy world has shifted so much, but it seems that our politicians are still stuck in 1956 or something like that. Here's what happened. The United States autopsied World War II after World War II, especially with Operation Paperclip. A bunch of Nazi scientists and paperwork and shit was repatriated to the U.S., and we said, look, we know that you did human experiments on people and shrunk their heads and, killed them in oxygen deprivation chambers and weird shit like that. But you build good rockets, and we want to go to the moon and beat the Soviets, and commies bad, so, we're just going to have a bunch of Dr. Strangeloves working for us. People with weird glasses who changed their name very quickly in many cases to avoid detection. You come and you work on, we'll give you a ranch down in Cape Canaveral area, and we'll limo you to work, and you just keep working on those solid fuel rockets of yours because they're very impressive. When they autopsied World War II, one thing became apparent. The Nazis had gobbled up an area that was relatively energy rich and diplomatically connected with some of those sultanates, you could call them at the time, and that's why they were able to prolong their war effort. They had energy woes in the last years of the war, but they had done fairly well because they blitzed into parts of the Middle East, the Levant, etc. They had influence there. North Africa comes to mind as well. The United States realized that he who controls the energy will control the subsequent century, barring the development of new technologies. There's a reason why the green movement, etc., begins to spring up only a few decades later in vogue. And so the natural result is that the United States took a look at the diplomatic situation in the Middle East and parts of Asia and said, well, we need to get involved here. We can't sit back. These places are closer physically to the Soviet Union. They're going to end up gobbling up the Middle East and having limitless energy resources, and at some point that's going to be a big fucking problem for us. So we started in Iran in the 1950s under Eisenhower. We rapidly switched back and forth between sultanate and dictatorship and burgeoning republic and collapsed dictatorship, constantly fiddling around in the region, and we've continued to do so to this day. This same struggle against the Soviet bloc, which was partially energy-related and partially trade-related, and that's the second phase, led to the situation that saw the rise of Al-Qaeda. The United States under Carter and then under Reagan arming the Taliban, the Mujahideen, and other groups, spawning what would become Al-Qaeda, in order to keep the Soviets from having a direct link to the Indian Ocean. The other big struggle was around trade, and the U.S. handily won this and continues to be top dog by far because it's not the petrodollar, it's the aircraft carrier dollar. I've explained this to people. The problem is that while we've secured the energy and we've secured the trade, we're now extended throughout the entire world, oceanic and shoreline especially, much of the Middle East, with diplomacy, with our military, etc., and this has pissed off a lot of people. And so Al-Qaeda gained all of these materials, all this access to shit, in the wake of, the no longer having an involvement in the region because the Soviet Union collapsed, and then the Mujahideen morphed into Al-Qaeda, and the rest is history. U.S. government policy, however well-meaning it may have been at times, and at other times certainly not, led to that situation. If you look at Al-Qaeda itself, and the groups associated with it, government, or rather authority, is also the problem. They have co-opted religion for their political authoritarianism. Osama was living the high life with Coca-Cola vending machines and, Western-made and probably Japanese-made porn and shit like that. Or at least, that tale is, I think that part is likely true. These people live like sultans, they live like kings, and then they have their ragtag bandit armies go and blow things up. We still have problems in Kabul. Not that long ago, there was a suicide bombing that killed a bunch of people. I think they were targeting the Russian embassy. Believe me, just because they hate the United States and call it the Great Satan doesn't mean they have any great love for the Russians either. So at the very least, we don't have to worry about them gobbling it up. They seem to work more with the Chinese than anyone at this point. This 9/11, remember that while the U.S. government didn't do 9/11, I'm not talking about thermite and controlled demolitions and all this shit, the U.S. government did invite the scenario, help Al-Qaeda, or what would become Al-Qaeda. We've done the same thing recently in Afghanistan by leaving them all sorts of weapons and armor. We're doing the same thing currently in Ukraine, I would warn, but, hindsight will be 2020. All of the wonks right now that are all gung-ho and have Ukrainian flags on their bios, 10, 15 years from now after the struggle's over and some Ukrainian sleeper cell decides to blow up a skyscraper in D.C. or something like that, they'll all pretend that they were in the know the whole time. Hindsight will always be 2020 from the wonk class. They don't make predictions so much as they say, whoops, I always knew. In retrospect, I made one tweet once 5 years ago where I kind of hinted that it was a bad idea, the direction we were going in. Just remember, on all sides, authoritarianism caused the problem. And then that same authoritarian W administration decided to cover up who the real perps were in the heavily redacted 9/11 report. Another glowing success of the Trump presidency, by the way, in largely undoing that and giving us more of the unredacted section. That points to what everybody and their mother suspected was the case at the time, which was that it was Saudi planned and financed. But they didn't want to piss the Saudis off because of what? Fuel. Oil. The U.S. was a major importer at the time under the W administration. We had a brief shining moment a few years ago where we were a net exporter and we were energy self-sufficient. Biden has pissed this away for good reasons, because his backers want a world like that in which we can continuously justify world policing and struggle and slaughter more people, and then those same people can cry crocodile tears and pretend to wonder why there are terrorist attacks on our own soil. It's been the same thing since the 1950s, since within living memory there's hardly a person who wasn't raised up in a period where the U.S. was doing this. And we're not the only ones. China is dangerously expanding into this same premise. So are the Russians at the moment, although again, they were involved with it in the past before as well. Again, invasion of Afghanistan by the Soviets, which was repulsed successfully by U.S. foreign policy, leading to us getting hammered in the face on 9/11/2001. Unfortunately, so things like that, as long as this remains our policy, as long as we remain more reliant on others, as long as we don't guard ourselves first and foremost and enrich and empower ourselves, will continue to happen. It's because of a stupid, a pathetic and feckless U.S. foreign and, I would say at this point, domestic policy. That's about all. Peace out.